Right. Yeah, I think we will have a kind of, we are not prepared for any presentation. We would like to have a discussion. It's a kind of panel discussion. Of course, I would like to start that you introduce yourself, also your services and your background, but no marketing pitch, just some key facts to understand where you're coming from and what you would like to achieve in the future. Mr. Michael.
So good morning. My name is Alexandre Steiner. I'm now a development director for Numergy. So I will explain who Numergy is. Before that, I've been in the IT services business and into the telco business for about 22 years, maybe more. And I've been actually involved in the cloud since 2009, where I was actually guiding the project for KPN to prepare its B2B cloud approach. And I've joined Numergy about a year ago. Numergy is actually a company that has been founded in September of 2012 with three main stakeholders. These are SFR for 47%, a telco provider, Dual, who's a hardware and software manufacturer and specialized in security, and the French government, Caisse des Dépôts, for 30%. So we have actually private and public founding of the company to prepare and to be a pure player of the IaaS industry of the public cloud sector. So it's quite an original way to approach it if you compare it to the other European countries, if you look at what happened in the UK or in Germany or in some other places. So we are really an upside-down startup in the sense that we've been given money to start with and more or less some guidance. And then we have to actually get the story around the money and to make it something that will work. So that's an original start. And in that story, I'm actually responsible for two topics. One is very close to what we've just heard with Cloud Catalyst, because I'm actually running a partner program with startup companies. So really looking for innovation and to help them and foster them to actually develop. We have an 18-month program to accompany a few of those. I can tell more about it, but it's not the topic of the day. And the other topic is very much for international development, where we are working on an alliance we've launched in June to make it an international cloud federation of national service providers of cloud. So we have started together with Belgacom, bcloud, and Numergy with two countries, and we're going to expand in the near future. So that's for the short introduction, maybe a bit long. Now for the rest of the topic, I will probably let my neighbor introduce himself before we go.
Hello, my name's Gary Ramsey. I'm from Dimension Data, the Dimension Data Cloud Business Unit. I've been involved in the cloud since 2005. Dimension Data 2 years ago acquired OpSource, which was a managed hosting and IaaS provider from the US. And we've basically become the cloud business unit within Dimension Data. Dimension Data's vision is one of trying to have a standard architecture at the top level across both public cloud and private cloud. So my colleague was saying that their model is very much on the public cloud. Our model is slightly different. We see the direction being hybrid cloud, where it will be a combination of both public and private. So I have responsibility for the business development within Europe, and I work with the Dimension Data countries individually within Europe to help position our cloud and help understand how we can actually build out the cloud business internationally.
Thank you both. So I understood both of you are seeing your cloud offering also as a European approach. So to understand the European requirements, considering that we are a non-harmonized market in terms of regulation and legal requirements, of course, which is already challenging. The topic is cloud platform choices, which means what are the choices for the future? We are not just talking about plain infrastructure as a service. We are talking about solutions and different business models you have to support with your solution offering. Now, Numergy is not a startup, although we are just acting since 1.5 years or a year. But with a good background, I think so.
No, absolutely. We've been lucky enough to inherit actually some platforms from our former team, SFR business team, which actually had a full environmental platform ready. So that's what we inherited from day one. So we were lucky to start with platform, clients, and so on and so forth. So we are able to say now after a year that it is working, it is up and running, and we are working on version 2. So in terms of platform, I would say two things. First of all, I would actually make one small comment on the presentation before to tie a link. We do see actually that there's a real need to push not only on the SMEs, but also large account and public sector. And we have made a very conscious choice to not be going direct to market. So our go-to-market is 100% indirect. So what it means is that we are considering that what we provide is very much digital power and nothing else. So we are actually have signed up now over 70, actually 80 partners who are resellers. Some are IT services, some are integrators, some are editors, ASVs and the likes. And the idea is very much that these are the guys who are actually targeting their usual markets. So the ones who are selling to SMEs continue to sell to SMEs. The ones who are selling to public sector continue to sell to public sector, and you got the picture. So that's the idea, and therefore we are really in the background to provide public cloud power, to anyone who needs it. And the services and the value-add services that needs to be tailored to each demand is done by the reseller network. So that's quite interesting because it's a different model than the ones we've seen. And since the cloud industry is still in the making, we are very curious to see how big we'll get in the coming few years. So that's what I wanted to tie with the SMEs, because I think it's quite interesting to just have the information that today most of our clients are coming from an existing networks and are SMEs actually.
Okay.
So having said that, the second topic on the platform, and I would come back to what my neighbor has just said, it's not because we offer public cloud that we believe public cloud is the answer. I do agree that it's going to be hybrid. The way of the future for cloud is going to be hybrid cloud, but when you look at what and where the value needs to come from, it's going to be very much coming from the people who know what the business of the client is. And we don't pretend as being a public cloud provider that we know what the business of all of our clients can be. Therefore, that's why we have chosen an indirect route. But when it comes to making a choice, and the picture I would like to take is probably the one of simplicity and the one of what we've seen in the industrial background in the last 150 years. If you remember, and I remember when I was a kid and I would travel to the Alps, I was born in the Alps, I was lucky enough to do that, so I'm a ski freak. The snow is coming up. There was actually a few factories that you would see in the end of the valley, and you would see actually the power of the water coming down those industry factories, which were actually done to only have a private power plant. And that was really something that was existing about 100 years ago. And actually it was the only way to get power in those remote places so that the factories could run. You can actually think of the cloud in that way. Today, people are actually building private clouds, aware of the fact that their cash is low, that their way of being and investing into capital expenditure is difficult, and they continue to do it, aware of the fact that they won't be able to continue to do it. There's no one industry in the world who don't and doesn't rely on digital power, on IT at large, and for that they need infrastructure. So how to get infrastructure and scale up when you cannot actually get all the cash you need and all the investment power? So the only answer to that is to get actually a mutualized way forward, and therefore to actually go for public cloud. Of course, mingled and integrated with your private environment, but you really need to get the two. So therefore, to go from your private plant that was actually a power plant to a mutualized one, and that's exactly what we believe the future of the industry will be. So what we need to do now is to make sure that we push very strongly and very hard towards all the standards we can, all the norms, the SLAs, and so on and so forth. So we are very active into some of the programs that were presented by Ken and some other people this morning, to make sure that we can actually ensure interoperability, that we can ensure that actually the standard and norms will work, so that the platform choice is not going to be anymore very much of a differentiator. The real differentiator will be that you can actually master it. If you can master it, you will need power, you will need the digital IT power, those virtual servers that are really part of the game. You will need compute, you will need actually storage, you will need actually the network, no matter where it comes from, but you will need to make sure that it works towards your security requirements, your power requirements, and so on and so forth. And that's very much what we believe the future is going to be like.
We're talking about contract, and you said already you're more focused on this hybrid or approach where you don't think you're not focused on the public cloud area, just with standardized contracts. I think we also heard today bespoke contracts is always an issue, that the customer would like to negotiate contracts and service level agreements. But on the other side, you try to standardize your business. How do you can reach a appropriate balance between all these individual questions according to a standardized provisioning?
So perhaps I didn't make myself clear enough. I agree with Andrea that I do think that the public cloud is the right way to go longer term. And it's some of those elements that it is perception that is holding it back for the adoption within organizations. And in the same way, some of the organizations are like the factories that you mentioned before that still think that they need their own private solutions. Now, I think there will have to be much more work done about the interoperability before we get to the point where people can consider that all the public cloud capability can come into the resource pool and can be adopted and used. It's not quite like as analogous as electricity is in the grid at the moment. It's much more complicated than that. And I think there's a fair amount of work that has to be done at the interoperability, at standards, at APIs and the like, before you would be in a position to genuinely use this analogy of electricity and digital power to be a true analogy that actually holds as actually being accurate. I think we're still a long way from that. And until we get to that point, the hybrid model of public and private will still be a large way in which people go forward. But as an organization, personally, I do agree that overall we have to keep pushing towards the public one moving forward. But I think there's a lot of work, and there's a challenge as well in that public cloud organizations are trying to differentiate themselves as well. So it's not just about price. It's not just about electricity where you can produce the lowest cost electricity. Maybe in electricity there are organizations which are green electricity rather than just pure price electricity. But with the public clouds, there's performance, there's special features, etc. So again, there's nuances there that even within the public cloud providers, I'm sure Numergy, are trying to position themselves as being slightly better in some areas than in other areas, so that people will use their public cloud rather someone else's public cloud. So I think that's the direction, but I think that using some of these analogies isn't totally fair just yet.
Yeah, I'm seeing different strategies here. You said, for example, you have your reseller network, so you're trying to get your link to the customer by the competence of the resellers who know the business of the customer, and they have to match the resourcing offering out of Numergy into the needs of the community. On the other side, when we talk about Dimension Data offering, it's more a kind of IT outsourcing or IT sourcing strategy in general, where cloud sourcing is part of the strategy to scale up and to add on resources, which includes the on-premise management, of course. And I think when we talk about interoperability, how do you address the quest in terms of monitoring to get all the transparency? Because I think this is one of the key concerns, that they lose control about their own IT. And this is also probably first you, and then we can continue with the reseller approach.
So I think some of the challenges on the reseller approach is because the reseller community themselves haven't yet worked out how they can add value into the public cloud. So they are being bypassed by buyers going straight to the public cloud, and I challenge some of the resellers to reinvent themselves, to actually think carefully where they were adding value, hence the VAR, value-added resellers, and that a lot of them were just resellers where they thought they could put a little bit of margin on and just do the same thing. I think that's a challenge that they face, that they need to change their mindset on that. So that's why I think that approach is challenging for them as much as for the cloud providers.
I think the margin issue is a real issue, because you're selling software licenses, you have a deal, you have a close, you get a lot of money then, but now you have to build up a customer, and then you keep the confidence and the trust in the service over the time, and probably the ROI will happen in 2 years after you build up the customer. I think this is something you have to address.
Absolutely. So to address exactly the point that you've just raised, we have actually put together a program to be along our resellers. So for that, we have certification programs to make sure that they understand what they can get out of our infrastructure, but we also bring to them a mix of what we can actually get from software editors who are actually SaaS players. So we're working with some of them, one in the room, Panelists, with actually a very interesting dashboard that we can bring to monitor your infrastructure across different cloud providers. So that's exactly going along the lines of saying that you can actually master your infrastructure even though it is not in your own premises. You can control and monitor what's happening anywhere and everywhere if you have the right tools for it. So that's part of the answer. So we give them actually some training and certification on what they need to do. We also have a program for editors and ISVs to help them to be ready for that chasm of going from a license sales to that 3-year zone of no return because the margin are being actually swamped away. And it's a difficult one. We have not cracked the code, but we can actually tell them what to expect and therefore what to be ready for. But, and that's true today, large accounts are putting pressure on us to do some tailored and customized solutions in the public cloud. We are giving up a bit because we need to sign some clients, new big names, but it's not the direction that we should want to go and continue to go. So for now, we're bending a little bit the rules just to get the market to mature a bit, but we know that long term we won't actually keep that. So it's an interesting way to make sure that we can get on board actually some of the large clients who say, hey, we don't want that public completely centralized or SLA-like that is not our requirements. So please put some milk in your coffee, which we agreed to do for a while, but that's a way to get the market to mature a bit. So we'll be ready for the future and really go into the full utility model. Now, just one more word on the interoperability story. There are actually many solutions to that. So I'm not saying that it is cracked and that we're already into a full utility market. I would agree with that. But there's a lot of software solutions which are actually putting some links across different infrastructure. And some of the platform choices, and that's probably one of the topics you wanted to address as well, are all converging to one area, which is actually now supported by OpenStack. So our first infrastructure version was not on OpenStack, it was on standard that we developed internally, where we relied on large editors with large manufacturers of hardware, and our version 2 is very much going into OpenStack. And that's part of thinking ahead about price, cost of producing it, but also interoperability. That's a question. Well, OpenNebula is not at the same level of adoption and maturity at this point in time. We've looked into it in depth, and we decided that we want to go OpenStack for the time being. So go with the flow, in other words, where we believe there's enough openness, and where actually the requirements and the infrastructure pressure are a little bit different. But we can talk about it in detail. We went in depth into this one.
yeah, because...
Okay.
Andreas, just an additional note regarding this, because in my view it's very important. One of our partners in Cloud Catalyst is precisely Ignacio Lorente, the head of OpenNebula, and one of our goals is also to help these projects go towards the industry. So I'm very looking forward to talk with you about that.
I'm afraid we've given up on this one, but we can take some other ones.
Just join by a glass of wine this evening, and probably you can move forward in this area. Now, when we are talking about this customization of requirements, especially on the enterprise level, and you're saying we need some milk here, wouldn't it be good, and this is also a position of EuroCloud, to understand why they're asking for these individual agreements? Is it sensible, or is it just because they are not reactive or they're not flexible enough? So we have to identify which is really justified as a base requirement out of the service level agreement and the service provisioning reliability, and on the other side where we need to convince the community that they have to modify themselves, otherwise they have to take the higher price, of course, because this is also an ongoing issue.
So that's a fair point, and I think this is where I think the model of the hybrid model, or the milk and the coffee occasionally, is that when you consider the milk and the coffee, the majority is coffee and there's just a dash of milk. And the principle should be that the solutions you're delivering should be the standard SLAs, the standard contracts, the standard, and that's what your public cloud is. And the 5, 10, 15, whatever the percentage of special that you need should be isolated in a private cloud or in managed hosting or in elements which you agree that are special and that you're going to have special contractual arrangements around. But as much as possible, you're convincing the customers that the majority of it can be in the public cloud with the standard contracts, and it's to their advantage that they get price performance improvements by being that, and you have to work with them to work out where the balance is between where they're prepared to pay more for the specials and where they're saying, no, that actually isn't a strong business requirement, that's just a perceived requirement, that when you look at the detail of what's already available in the public cloud and the strength of the SLAs, that is reasonable that you can actually go for that. So that's certainly our approach, that we keep the public cloud as clean as possible, but that's why we believe that the hybrid solutions is where the elements of variation and these specials, SLAs or special contracts have to come in.
So I think to reflect the activity of the European Commission, especially the ETSI track, where they're cutting the jungle of standards beside the provisioning of use cases, I think this is a solution path probably when we consider, yes, we have a standardized IT provisioning, but we have various use cases, and of course each use case has an impact on the service level requirements. And we find a matching between the use cases and a core service level requirement plus a special requirement per use case. This might help. But on the other side, we identified already more than 110 use cases. They have been reduced to 21 core use cases, but I think this is something we have to address to streamline this communication instead of negotiating, because in terms of resourcing, you're sitting together with 10 people for 5 weeks just to negotiate SLAs, which is, from the economic point of view, not the right approach.
Great.
And I would be very curious to know if the majority of the cases are not actually meant or driven by the fact that there's actually some legacy involved. And that's really where we have to pay the price of legacy, because you actually have some special requirements when you have to actually emulate or put something that is not meant to be in a certain way, in a way that you want to put it. What I mean by that is when you have an application that is not multi-tenant, not SaaS, and you want to put it in the cloud, it's going to be hard work. If you know exactly that you've been actually a native multi-tenant and you are already SaaS and you want to move from one cloud to the other, piece of cake. So that's really where you really need to understand that the legacy, the price you have to pay for legacy, and therefore to adapt to the fact that you can bring something on an existing application to an infrastructure that is not meant to run it, that's where you have some platform choices that could be interesting. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It means it requires some work. So you have actually three big topics. One is already taken by my neighbor of perception and psychology. So there's a psychology barrier of actually not going into a public cloud, meant by stories, by hearsay, by habit, by control, and supposedly loss of control that is actually perception. Once you have actually bridged that, or you have actually crossed a little bit the perception story, you have to look at regulation. Regulation, legislation, and everything that is going to be local to local. Even though we have big trends towards European harmonization, it's not there yet. So therefore, you have to make sure that you will be compliant locally with data privacy rules, with VAT rules, with whatever you have. VAT is an easy one, but some other tax issues and so on and so forth. So that's something that you have to check. And the third one is going to be very much related to the technology itself, where because of the SLAs, because of the latency of the network, because of the depth of the breadth of the compute that you need to have, you're going to have some specific requirements. So therefore, when you know exactly what you need, if your big challenge is compute, or if your big challenge is storage, you will probably go to different platforms. And that's where we need to be ready with our network resellers to actually make sure that we can comply. So those are the three main things that you really need to be aware of.
Okay, thank you. So we have 5 minutes left. Probably have further questions from the audience, because you gave me a perfect topic in terms of acceptance, and we cannot solve everything on the technical level. It's just how to.
I'm afraid we can. I'm afraid we can. That's actually that's a running joke for the past 25 years, being in the IT industry. When you ask something to any IT engineer in the world, the answer is going to be yes, it's possible. Everything's possible in IT. It's a question of time and money. So we'll solve it eventually. Now, the question is, are you ready to put that much money or to wait that much time? That's the only question that you have to have back. And that's exactly why we have to wait for the standards and interoperability to be really at the maturity level it requires, but it will come. So we have to be ready for it and accept the fact that we are a bit backward looking when we believe that it's not utility yet. And it's part of what the digital economy war should be, where we have to offer a European alternative to the big American player or Asian players who are actually making a pan-European network of capacity where we could have a country-by-country approach federated. And that's very much the sense of the SkyTeam Alliance like that we have launched a few months ago.
Another question to data dimension in terms of service offering. Do you think cloud brokerage is also a new model of cloud provisioning? Well, you've probably heard about this project from the German stock exchange where they are trying to establish broker services for cloud together with interoperability. Do you think this will get a lot of acceptance, or do you think the direct approach is better?
No, I think that model is one that's certainly going to become more prevalent. We are involved in a process with a large consumer company, and they are saying that they have to go and re-architect a lot of their applications to get advantage of cloud, but they want to go with much more of a cloud catalog model where the providers will make available their compute, their storage, their whatever at whatever price points that they want, and their organizations will be able to pick from the catalog rather than going through the RFP process every single time, and that over time they will move from cloud to cloud depending on a particular requirement of price points at different times. So I see that's a model that has the potential of working once there is a closer element of standardization. So it will take a while to get there, but it certainly is a model that we're seeing for the first time, this concept rather than the RFP where you have to be features. It's now much more the acceptance that public clouds are very, very similar.
Do you agree we need a new model in terms of that we have to match the technical resourcing together with compliance criteria, together with security requirements and so on? Because this will have influence on the pricing as well. But,
yes.
So there must be different opt-ins to choose the appropriate model or provisioning, service provisioning according to the legal and compliance requirements.
Yes, and I think that it's not just going to be the definition of your compute, for example, and clearly from Numergy, they're positioning that they are public cloud within France. So there will be a price premium or that, and if customers want to pay that premium for that particular value-add service, the fact that they can guarantee it's in there is going to be an element that they would include in their definition of what their service was. So it's a service of compute with these value-added features. Dimension Data would have other value-added features, other providers would have other value-added features, and so that there will be an element of price plus feature. It won't just be compute, but the extra elements will be a small differential compared to the standard elements.
Could I add maybe one or two things on the topic? Well, first of all, I don't believe that the model of the cloud service broker a la Deutsche Börse will work for a long time. Main reason being that if you go that direction, it means that all of the people who will actually buy online are able to be self-sustainable on what they will buy. And that is not the case. So it will work for a while, and it's a model, by the way, that is already used. There's at least 3 platforms that I know which are doing exactly the same thing. One in the US, 2 in the US, 1 in Asia, and this one in Germany growing up. So it's a nice temporary model to put pressure on everyone to get lower costs or lower prices. But it's not very healthy, first of all. But it's not also very much the way that the future will actually be there. Because when you will actually turn to get that digital power, you will want to get it from different sources. So whether it's a country, whether it's a technology, whether it's something else. So there will be actually enough room for everyone. We've talked about 900 billion euros of market by 2020. I don't know if I would have those numbers, but it's big enough to have enough players for everyone. So I don't think we're competing yet for whether there will be enough market. That model is not one that I believe will work, but more of the value-added reseller where they will actually get their own choices of being a wholesaler as opposed to actually having a direct touch for that. There was another topic that was mentioned on the What was the second topic that you've touched upon? Sorry, I forgot.
To match the service offering with requirements.
Oh, yeah.
Individually.
And that's absolutely true. There will be strength, depending on the providers, that will be more on the compute side or on the storage side, and the price point will be different there. But what you need to make sure that you will get, and that's at least what we believe will be important, is simplicity, and that there won't be some traps. I don't know if you've been now trying to actually buy online some infrastructure, but it looks like it's very appealing. There's actually one dominant player that everybody knows about. You need about 70 clicks to be able to go from what you need to what you can have up and running. And in those 70 clicks, you can have some traps where actually the cost can go up with no apparent reason. Well, there are some good reasons for it because you haven't read everything and kept everything online. And we see a lot of startup companies who've started in that way who are coming back to finding other models where it could be simpler and more predictive. So that's quite important. And by the way, even though we're only a French player, we already are quite well positioned in pure price against that big player on some topics.
So you still think you are competitive?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's. I like to hear this.
But we need more. So we need to have more countries actually along the line so that we can become even more competitive.
Okay, so we have to strengthen the community. We have to go into a similar direction, and we understand the European market, of course. So this is something which is some of our USPs. Well, thank you very much. We reach our time. If you have any final statement you would like to share with the audience, just go ahead. But I think we understood that cloud platform choices is a very complex area. We have to create some more visibility in this area as well for the community.
So the final word on my side would be that we're actually trying to really build that cloud team alliance to be able to cover Europe with national cloud providers. So if you have a strong cloud provider in a country where we have not signed up anyone yet, please join us.
Okay.
Nothing to add, but I do agree that there is room for plenty of players. We know that Amazon is the key player in that, but I agree that there are traps in there, and that there is the market is growing, and it's important that the organizations that they come out, they identify what it is, the value add that they bring. Even at the IaaS level, there is still elements and abilities to differentiate yourselves from the rest of the competition. It's important you're able to articulate that.
Just to be very clear, we are not looking for, although we are EuroCloud, we are not thinking that we have to build a protected European cloud. It is an international market, of course, and then we have to compete, and we have to show our value, of course. And of course, there are a lot of projects together with these big players which are running very well, which are very good, but we have more options for differentiation, of course, in place. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.